Not only a bad day for Juventus today, Grella, but kind of capping off a bad week. They lost in the Derby d'Italia against Inter, even though they did play some good football, didn't they? And you know, you were commending them for how they managed that game despite the scoreline. Today, though, being up at half-time to lose in that fashion was massively disappointing.
Yeah, it was not great. And I don't want to take anything away from Galatasaray. They've played fantastic for 90 minutes. They played an open game. They have unbelievable players, 1v1. We said this. But I'll also say this, too, because I was getting attacked by Galatasaray friends, crazy fans, right? Zidane didn't play today for Juventus. Nedved didn't play today for Juventus. Chiellini didn't play. Bonucci didn't play. Buffon was not in goal. Alessandro Del Piero didn't play. When I talk about Juventus, I watched them my whole life. That's what I'm talking about when I think about Juventus in the history of the club. So you have to take with a grain of salt also, this is a different Juventus. This is Juventus now for the last 5 years that's been trying project after project, investment after investment to go back to those levels. And it's not easy to find those levels. So all be a credit to Galatasaray, because I think whoever they came up against today at home, where they're very good, that would have been difficult a game to play against. They destroyed Juventus, there's no question about it. But the fact of the matter remains, when you look at through the scope of Juventus, that a lot of the players there wearing the Juventus shirt, they're not Juventus caliber. We come week in and week out, and we talk about Weston McKennie being the best player in Juventus. I'm going to repeat myself again one more time. Weston McKennie, the best player in Juventus. With all due respect to Weston McKennie and the game that he brings and the character that he is, and obviously he's going to be a big piece for the U.S. men's national team going forward, it's impossible that a player like Weston McKennie can be the best player in Juventus. If you understand the history of Italian football and you understand the history of Juventus. This was my point about the game today. They're not up to the level. And today it got exposed by a very good Galatasaray team, a team that had everything, every tool. Center forward, one of the best in the world, working, unbelievable work rate. 5 goals they scored. He didn't score any of them, but he was involved in almost all of them because he occupied the center back so much. So Galatasaray put them in a game that the tempo was so high, aggressive game, physical game, and Juventus couldn't cope because they don't have Juventus caliber players.
Is that not a bigger worry for you, though, with Italian football in general?
There's a big worry.
That now that the physicality of where other leagues and other teams are getting to, the Italian teams seem to be a little bit stuck in the past with the tactical, technical way of trying to do things. Yes, that's great to have a foothold in the game, but you need to be able to compete physically now as well. It just feels like that if you take the midfield of Juventus, for example, they can't live with the Galatasaray midfield, just from a purely physical point of view, not technical and tactical. Then you look at Napoli again, probably the opposite. We would expect them to be great. They don't even get through. It's just, I don't know, that feeling of what is it that Italian football is trying to recreate? You just spoke there to Juventus having 3 or 4, maybe even 5 times trying to get back to the levels that I grew up watching, similar to yourself. How do we get back to that? What's the catalyst to make that happen?
Yeah, when you look at it...
So it's a question for both, sorry.
Yeah. I think when you look at it from a macro perspective, and this is a known fact, you know, Inter is the team that made 2 Champions League finals in the last 3 years. And it's because they're really smart with the way they use their money. For an Italian team to arrive to the Champions League final, they have to be so good investment-wise. They can't miss. Juventus have missed after missed after missed in their investments. And also, Italian teams cannot spend the kind of money anymore that they were able to spend maybe 20 years ago, right? So they have to bring in, with all due respect, players like Kelly, players like Cabal, players like, there's so many examples, right? So then it becomes difficult to compete at the highest level because you can't attract the best players anymore. It's difficult for you to attract the best players. You know, we were talking about a couple of weeks ago, and I think Tony might even agree with this. Modric is in conversation of being the best player in Italy. He's 40 years old, Troy. And to take nothing away from Modric, one of the greatest players that's ever played. But the Italian football is relying on a guy that's 40 years old. He scored a great goal last week, by the way, to be one of the best players in Italy because of the money that they're not allowed to spend. Now, whether that's through budget, whether that's through all the new FIFA rules, also through infrastructure. The Italians are a little bit stubborn in the way that they look at the game. You're talking about they're playing in stadiums that are 60, 70 years old. San Siro's over 100 years old. Right? And only now they're talking about well, they started the conversation long ago, but to redoing the stadium. So the infrastructure's not there. It's hard to attract good players. And then you end up battling with some of the best teams in Europe. And it becomes difficult for Italian teams over the stretch.
On the flip side to that, you cut mine as well, player you speak about, like 70 million. So when you say that we're not spending a lot of money, you're spending 70 million euros on one player, and you miss, over the course of his time, you miss. Would that not be better now going infrastructurally at a lower level with your 15s right the way through to create the players that you want in your team.
Absolutely. And that was also DNA of Italian football. Sorry,
Right.
Juventus bought Pogba for nothing, for free. I don't know if it was $5 million now because it's a long time ago, or they got him for free. Right, and then they sold them on for 90 million, right? That was the Juventus MO. I mean, I used to, when I was younger, I used to always admire the fact that they could find these diamonds in the rough and then really mold them the way they wanted and then sell them on for a lot of money. I thought that was always the DNA. And then the second that Juventus, in particular, because you're talking about coal miners, went for Cristiano Ronaldo, spent all that money on him, and actually set them backwards in these last few years. It was never the Juventus DNA. It's not a sustainable model for Italian football. They have to find those guys that have talent. Like an example would be Atalanta. They find these guys at the 10, 20, 30 million range and then make them $100 million players. So it's very tricky for Italian football. But their infrastructure, unfortunately, is a little bit behind when you look at the Premier League or you look at other clubs.
But I don't think we're going to see those Juventus, Milan teams anymore. Not only in Italian football, we're not seeing a lot of them in world football because there's so much money spread around European football that guys are like, you know what, I don't need to play Juventus. I can go play at, Galatasaray and make as much money. I can go someplace else.
Go Saudi or wherever, yeah.
But the part of the question that I wanted to take on was your part about Italian football, maybe the physicality. I think Italian football hasn't caught up to the transition, and I mean true transition in the game.
Yeah.
Like, it's not that type of game. When you watch the Premier League, what is it? It's transition all the time. Who did we hear, Gordon, right, last week talk about the difference between Champions League and the Premier League? If you're starting to watch La Liga, it's becoming a little bit more transitional. The Bundesliga has been transitional for years, right? And maybe a little bit more structured, but still transitional. In Italy, it's still tactics over here and tactics over here, and which one beats the other one? Like, you tell me, for me, there's one transitional team in Serie A, right? And that's Inter. And that's
Atalanta a little bit.
Atalanta a little bit, but they still like to put the ball on the deck. But I like the way they play. Como's now, but we're talking about Como, a team who's attractive, right? But are they a Champions League team that's going to compete for champions? So that's the part of your question I wanted to get to. I don't think they've caught up to the transition of world football. I love Serie A because of the tactics. I'm one of those guys, when we sit at the table, I move the pepper shaker over here and I put the bottle over here and we're moving all pieces around. I love that part of the game. But does it help you in a moment like today, where Galatasaray, I mean, they put their foot on the pedal when they came out of the dressing room, right? And they really put Juventus under pressure, and Juventus couldn't keep up with the speed. Now, of course, they have injuries, we know, but if you're just watching the game today, the game was won by Galatasaray because they made it fast with the ball, and they made it fast when they didn't have the ball, right? And that was, for me, and that's the part we've spoken about this off air a bunch of times. That's the part for me that Serie A really hasn't caught up to in my eyes right now.
I mean, overall, so far, it's not looking great, is it, for the Italian teams? You said even, Grella, for Napoli to go out in the stage of the competition that they did was an embarrassment. Then for them to finish in 30th place, they weren't even close in the end to making that cutoff. Bodo Glimt's no pushover, but for both teams to kind of be trailing, you even said after this game for Juventus to overturn that tie, you don't feel confident in them, even though they're at home now. It's 3 goals. Had it been 1 or 2, it's a completely different story.
Yeah, and I just think, Pop, we cover Serie A. We got the honor to do so, and I come in every week and I say there's one team in Italy, and Tony just said it himself. There's one team in Italy that stands above the rest. And that's the reason why they made so many Champions League finals recently. It's Inter. Inter have the infrastructure, they have the team, they invest their money properly, and they have the players, and they have the style of football. It's a more transitional style of football. When you look at Atalanta, they just got a new manager not long ago. He's a young manager in Palladino. They scored 10 goals in the Champions League in the group stage, and they only conceded 10. So it's not like we were a team that was lighting things up. When you look at Juventus, they had to change managers 3 times in the last 2 years. Right, so what's that project look like? And they missed on so many players as well. So for me, there's one team in Italy that's at the caliber of where the other teams used to be, but they're not there. Juventus is not there. Milan under Allegri is not there. Atalanta is not there yet. I mean, you look at all these sides, they're just quite simply Napoli. They're not there. Roma, they're not there yet. I mean, these are all new projects with all new teams. The biggest disappointment for me was Napoli. But that if you watched them play last season, you knew that they were not going to be able to compete in the Champions League this season. There's so much that grit and hard work and character and all these things mentality can give you. At the end of the day, you have to know how to play with this. And I don't think many of the Italian teams do, aside from Inter.